Zqka, the Polymath, Episode 2, the Liturgy of Unbecoming. After the transfigurative egress from the lithic sanctum, Zqka did not immediately re-enter the convivial interlacements of the hamlet, for his consciousness had entered a state of hyperlucent suspension, a prolonged intermezzo of contemplative reverberation. He lingered upon a promontory of calcified elevation, overlooking valleys suffused with pearlescent vapors, wherein the atmosphere itself appeared to respirate with sentient intentionality. During this interval of quiescent percipience, Zqka discerned a subtle yet inexorable gravitational summons, not terrestrial, but ontological. It was not a beckoning of sound nor vision, but a torsion within awareness itself, a curvilinear inclination toward regions of cognition unvisited and verities unarticulated. This summons manifested as a recursive ideation, a spiraling intuition that the revelations he had integrated were preparatory, not terminal. Thus commenced his peregrination beyond the hamlet's circumferential familiarity, into expanses cartographically uninscribed and epistemologically unbounded. The terrain transmuted progressively, from sylvan undulations to expanses of vitrified mineral plains, where the ground refracted light into prismatic bifurcations and the horizon dissolved into kaleidoscopic indeterminacy. As Zqka advanced, the phenomenology of perception itself underwent recalibration. Distance attenuated, temporality liquefied, objects no longer occupied static loci, but shimmered as probabilistic apparitions, coalescing only when attended with deliberate intentionality. In this realm, cognition was not a passive reception, but an active architectonic force, sculpting experiential actuality through resonant focus. Within this refractive expanse, Zqka encountered the chorion of vestigial intelligences, an aggregation of disembodied cognitions, neither specter nor deity, but residual sapiences from aeons of abandoned cosmologies. They hovered as translucent palimpsests of memory, murmuring in polyphonic cadences, each voice an echo of a civilization that had exhausted its metaphysical coherence. The chorion did not obstruct Zqka's passage, yet neither did they yield unconditionally. They enveloped him in a circumambient susurrus, probing the tensile integrity of his understanding. Images cascaded through his awareness, epochs collapsing under dogmatic rigidity, luminous cultures calcifying into authoritarian geometries, revelations weaponized into orthodoxies. From this immersive inundation arose a singular interrogation, articulated without syntax. What remains when illumination ossifies? Zqka did not respond immediately, for the inquiry necessitated an excavation beneath the strata of insight he had thus far accrued. He contemplated the trajectory of comprehension, how epiphanies, when idolized, become impediments, how truths, when enthroned, resist evolution. He perceived that illumination, divorced from humility, curdles into dominion. At last, his response emerged not as assertion, but as harmonic alignment. his presence itself modulated, emitting a frequency of supple receptivity, conveying the recognition that illumination must remain perennially porous, lest it become a mausoleum of its former vitality. The chorion dissipated, their murmurs resolving into a valedictory resonance, and the terrain ahead unfolded into a vast amphitheater of obsidian and starlight. At its epicenter stood the axis of reversion, a colossal spire composed of recursive geometries, each facet reflecting not the external cosmos, but interior states of being. Approaching the axis, Zqka perceived that this structure functioned as an ontological crucible, a mechanism through which beings encountered their own subtlest distortions, attachments masquerading as virtues, convictions disguising insecurities. Upon contact, the axis activated. Zqka was inundated with experiential inversions. Moments of certainty reappeared as constrictions. Instances of benevolence revealed latent paternalism. Even his humility was refracted, exposing infinitesimal residues of self-congratulation. This was not condemnation, but clarification, a meticulous exfoliation of unnoticed accretions. The process was neither punitive nor indulgent. It was surgical. As each distortion surfaced, it dissolved, not through repudiation, but through compassionate acknowledgement. Zqka realized that transcendence was not ascent alone, but descent into ever more refined honesty. The axis responded accordingly, its luminance intensifying as internal congruence increased. When the process culminated, the spire dematerialized, leaving Zqka within a void of volutinous darkness, not absence, but gestational latency. From this darkness emerged the custodians of unknowing, figures robed in negation rather than fabric, their forms defined by what they were not. They conveyed no doctrine, offered no symbols. Their presence articulated a singular principle, that unknowing was not deficiency, but sanctuary. Through silent communion, Zqka apprehended that wisdom must periodically relinquish itself, returning to fertile uncertainty, lest it stagnate into doctrine. Knowledge, they conveyed, is a tide. To clutch it is to drown. When the custodians receded, Zqka found himself transformed yet again, not augmented, but simplified. Vast internal architectures collapsed into spacious clarity. What remained was a lucid readiness, an attunement to emergent meaning rather than inherited interpretation. His journey continued through regions increasingly abstract, fields of probability blooms, where potentialities unfolded like heliotropic flowers, corridors of inverted causality, where outcomes preceded intentions, sanctuaries of shared silence, inhabited by wayfarers whose presence communicated more than any articulation. In one such sanctuary, Zqka encountered a childlike figure assembling constellations from fragments of sound. The figure looked up, eyes vast with primordial innocence, and asked, not with words, but with tonal curiosity. Will you remember this when you speak? Zqka understood immediately. Revelation, once vocalized, risks distortion. Teaching can become theater. Insight can become identity. He knelt, not in obeisance, but in alignment, and allowed the question to inscribe itself permanently within his being. Eventually, the terrain began its gradual recoagulation into familiar dimensionality. Gravity reasserted. Horizons stabilized. The hamlet's mountains shimmered distantly, visible yet irrevocably altered by the vantage from which they were now perceived. Zqka returned, but not as an emissary nor savior. He returned as permeable presence. His speech, when offered, was sparse. His silences expansive. He no longer sought to illuminate, but to invite. He no longer dismantled fear, but rendered it unnecessary. Those who encountered him found themselves subtly reoriented, not instructed, but remembered. Conversations became clearer. Conflicts softened without resolution. Insight arose spontaneously, unclaimed by authority. And Zqka himself remained vigilant, perpetually relinquishing even this role, for he now knew the most treacherous illusion, to mistake the journey for an arrival. Thus, his voyage continued, not across terrain, but through deepening subtlety, an ever-refining pilgrimage into consonance with the ineffable, where beatitude was not ecstasy alone, but exquisite coherence with what eternally unfolds.